You're welcome.
There we go.
Well, welcome. Welcome. Well, okay, are you going to start recording?
Are you recording?
Oh, great. Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to GC and MCS 115. This is Graphics and Multimedia, a multicultural perspective. And today we have a guest speaker. Very fortunate to have Dr. Jacobo. He is the chair of multicultural studies here at Palomar College. He is also a lecturer at SDSU in the Chicana and Chicano Studies Department. He also has numerous publications. And in fact, you can go to Amazon right now, right, and get his latest book, which is called Negotiating Spaces, The Lives of Undocumented Youth. So today, Professor Jacobo is going to speak about the history and roots of stereotypes of Spanish-speaking populations here in the United States, and the importance and impact in our media. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Good morning. If you buy my book, I can go to Cancun, so that'll be nice, right? Anyways, let me tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, I actually grew up close to here working in the fields. My mom and dad were farm workers here in North County, San Diego, and right out over here, the 76 and North River Road. We grew up in that area, and for the last about 15 years, I've been at San Diego State. And I came over here 2 years ago to work at Palomar College, and I've been very happy here since then. So that's a little bit of my background. I want to talk about stereotypes. I know that we know they exist, and we know that sometimes, in fact, they can even be funny, you know. But we also know that in the wrong minds, they can be obviously very, very dangerous. And I want to make this interactive, if you don't mind. I want your help. And we can begin by, I don't know if anyone wants to help me get on board. I want to begin to talk about what are some of the stereotypes that you see today in media, or even just out there in society, about people of Latin American people or Mexican Americans perhaps in particular, which is my background. So I don't want you to be stressed, relax, we're amongst friends. Let's pretend we're somewhere having a conversation, right? And that doesn't mean that you believe this yourself. No one's going to jump us out of class. We're just having an intellectual conversation about stereotypes. So what are some of the stereotypes you think out there that you see in media about Mexicans or Mexican Americans, Latinos? Please. Don't be afraid.
I'm trying to think of some.
Okay. Give them a little.
They're dangerous.
They may be dangerous, okay. Does anyone want to write these out there for extra credit?
Sure. Yeah.
Can we take my class next semester? I'll give you extra credit. But I don't know. Can we? It'll make you feel so.
She's looking good.
I know. I'll get the car.
Okay.
So one is dangerous, right? That's okay, dangerous. Okay. And maybe we'll talk about these in a minute, and then we'll go back into history, okay, see how they came up. So dangerous. You're not going to hurt my feelings, please.
Gang related.
Gang. Okay, gang related. Okay, gangs.
Narc related.
Okay, so dangerous, gangs. We said also, yeah, I guess drug dealers.
Large families.
Large families is definitely one. Large families. It's a very typical one thing. Large families.
Farm workers.
Say that again.
Farm workers.
Yeah, farm workers. Okay. Maybe like farm workers.
Oh, housekeepers.
Housekeepers. Okay.
Illegals. Illegals.
Yeah, illegal. Okay, illegals. Okay. Now we're going somewhere. All right. Good.
Something that was a lot of them.
Yeah, don't worry. We have filled entire boards with these.
What was the last one? Illegal.
Illegals, and large families.
Yeah. Can you guys read this? Sorry.
I can. Yes. That's nice compared to my writing. That's why I have you. Good job. Keep them coming, people. What else? Anything about religion?
Oh, Catholic.
Okay, Catholic.
See, the rosary.
Yeah, Catholic, rosaries. Okay. Yeah, the rosaries, yeah, we'll find them in our cars or on us.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? There's many more.
I'm so immersed in it here. It's just
Yes. They're very, very kind, very good people.
Poverty.
Poverty, okay, poverty. What about education, for example? When you see again a movie, you see maybe a
Dropout.
program on TV. Say again.
Dropout?
Maybe dropouts. There's some of these stereotypes. Unfortunately, have some factuality to them, of course. Today it's about 50% dropout rate in some of these high schools.
Hot tempered,
Hot tempered.
especially the women.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
My girlfriend's from Colombia, so
There you go. Hot tempered.
I get that firsthand experience.
Anything else you can think about? How about public charge? I mean, in other words, like welfare abuse. Is that a stereotype?
What kind of abuse?
Welfare abuse.
Like, it's really called public charge, that you abuse the system.
Oh,
You know,
yeah, I think everybody does that though, I don't.
Well, I don't know, well, at least my perspective, it tends to be a stereotype. Maybe
With
I'm
the
wrong.
law, they have problems with the
Okay,
law.
maybe problems with law, okay. Put that down, put it down there. Any more, so we can begin to close this part of it?
That they're all certain color.
Okay, we're all brown and short. What do they say, good things come in small packages, right? Anything else?
The men are very forward.
Okay. May not very
Oh,
forward.
they're very aggressive.
Oh,
Very aggressive.
not me.
Not you. Shy and dreamy.
Because my wife is like the woman you mentioned before.
Yeah, that would be good.
All right. Any more before we close this part of it?
Oh, chauvinistic.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Like machistas,
Yeah,
machos,
machismo.
machismo.
The men like to be in charge.
That's a facade in most of our cases, but.
It is.
So I think we have some of the main ones. We have sort of dangerous social elements in society. We have religion, we have poverty and education, crime. You know, in fact, when your professor and I were talking a few days ago about this sad and unfortunate case of the shooting of a Border Patrol agent that turned out to be an accidental, I guess, or what they call friendly fire on the border. One of the things I mentioned to her was that in the news I heard the term Mexican bandits, you know, banditos or bandits, and it kind of took me back to 100 years ago in terms of history with the term, again, bandit. But we have a lot of these stereotypes that come really from history. We'll talk about those in 1 second, okay? Anything else before we go forward? Well, thank you so much. Okay. So let's look at some of these. Again, there's certainly dangerous, this idea, and I'm going to put myself right in the front of this, okay? That somehow the Latino community is a dangerous element in society. You know, again, if you allow me, I'll put myself in an example of this. There is consistently this a stereotype, and often, obviously, from our perspective, this particular community it can be very harming. Just last semester, I was stopped by the police in National City, and I wasn't sure why they had stopped me, and in fact, I asked him, why have you stopped me? I know I made the stops and everything else, right? And so he says to me that I made a certain profile of someone that they're looking for, okay? And as soon as I heard that word, of course, I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. You know, this is a profile. You know, at the end, everything was fine, and it turned out to be a very nice guy. But at the beginning, which obviously there was some hostility there on both of our sides, because he's saying he's looking for someone who has committed crimes, apparently, and I look like this person. I'm thinking, well, you know, what does he look like? Well, he is Latino male, you know, shaped head. And I answered, well, this is genetics. It's not necessarily my style of haircut. This is just genetics, you know. And, you know, I tend to joke a lot, which gets me in trouble a lot. I said, if you're looking for the 0.02 Latino with PhDs, then I'm your guy. I'm not necessarily something I haven't done anything wrong. And so anyways, eventually we got things, you know, corrected, right? For a brief moment, again, there was this really tense moment. I was scared, to be honest with you, okay? You know, it happens, you know, quite a bit. I know that I live in a neighborhood. I'm about to move up here to North County, but I live in San Diego, and in a fairly middle-class white neighborhood, you know. And people around me know who I am, and that I work at San Diego State. But people beyond my immediate, you know, blocks, I noticed again, people do look at me a certain way. I have tattoos, you know. With the right sunglasses, I look pretty much like a homeboy, you know. You know, whenever I walk around, I do see different reactions by people, right? And so there are, again, these stereotypes that somehow represent dangerous, population somehow, okay, which again, media plays on that quite a bit, right? With your movies, your programs on TV, it consistently portrays, the Latino males, as we mentioned before, something that's aggressive, gang, related activity, drug-related activity, that kind of thing. The large families are true of any agrarian society, right? And until the last 20 years, Mexico began to change from a more to an urban, right, sector society. But of course, back then, like in the United States, in the Midwest, we have large families because they were the workers of the families. The idea of labor, I think whether it's housekeeping or farm working or just manual labor, we tend to stereotype as well. And I know I've experienced that. I hope you believe me because I'm not lying to you. I've stood in front of my house. I live right now by San Diego State. Again, that's where I work most of these years. I mowed my lawn, and people have stopped to ask me how much I charge. Seriously, yeah. And I do pretty horrible work. I wouldn't hire myself. But I mean, I'm telling you that I am probably the only person in my block that mows his own lawn. And that's because my dad gave me a lawn mower for my birthday. I don't know why he did. But anyway, the thing is, I'm out there mowing the lawn, and more than once, people have stopped and they have asked me how much I charge. One time I was also putting down cement with my father. Same thing. How much do you guys charge? I'm like, well, I live here. Here's a funny story, if I may. One college, in fact, one time I was with one of my colleagues that he lives down in Bonita, and he invited me to go help him with plant some trees down, and we're in the front yard doing that, and a lady stops by and she says to us same thing, and it's a very broken attempt at Spanish. She says, "Señores, how much do you charge you? Kind of how much?" So, here we are, these two arrogant, professors, and he says to her, you might want to edit this later on, okay? He says to her, "Oh, I do it for sex. The lady here sleeps with me, He's talking about his wife, But the lady just, cussed at us and she took off. But, it becomes one of those things where, again, people somehow assume that you don't live there, Again, you don't maybe fit a stereotype or the prototype for someone who resides, in this particular community. And so, there's endless stories that I can tell you, again, from my experience, my own personal experience, and others, that relate to this kind of stereotyping. My brother got married, this is some years back, in the Golden Triangle area in La Jolla, real nice, wedding. And I was there, of course, and there I was in my tuxedo, typical sort of, again, stereotypical Mexican colors, black and burgundy, type of thing. And I went out to the parking lot to get some stuff from my brother and his wife. When I was going by the lobby, I'm being asked by people to take out their luggage from their car, I'm like, So there are, again, these stereotypes about what kind of work that people do. Again, in this case, in fact, I'll tell you if you ever want to take my class, in the early 20th century, there used to be actual jobs advertised that were called Mexican jobs or Mexican work. And that meant a certain kind, of course, of occupation. I mean, today, frankly, in the absence of PC, we could be talking about jobs that would be called Mexican work, whether it's restaurant work or landscaping, things that I just don't address in this case. But certainly the issue of being Catholic, perhaps today does not carry as much weight as it did historically. We'll see that right now in the excerpt of history. Poverty, of course, there is poverty. And education is a big problem. We have a huge problem when it comes to educational access. There is about a 50% dropout rate from high schools by Latinos, and in particular Mexican origin students, who are not graduating from high school, and even less and less, of course, go on to become BAs, BS, MAs, PhDs. But that is a problem. Let's go back into history, if you don't mind. I do want your help. I'm going to have us perhaps go back 100 years and look at certain quotes from politicians, from educational people, and doctors, how they looked at Mexican origin people or Latinos in general across the last 100 years. You want to help me out? Who wants to read? I will buy you coffee, whatever it takes. Some of the stuff I wrote myself, so it's pretty cool. My advice. One at a time, please.
I'll read if no one wants.
All right.
Come on.
I'm going to have you read it. Well, let me choose something super cool. can begin, because we can start with you. We'll probably go back instead of going forward. All right. Anyone else, please?
I'll read something.
Thank you, thank you. Maybe.
Very.
A few more. Please.
I'll read,
All right.
just to prove that I can.
Yes. Right. I mean, this I wrote myself. It's super, super important. Make it look good. Okay. Anyone else? It's a bit of reading, but we can probably force you if we have to, but we don't want to force you.
Come on, guys, somebody, anybody.
We can read.
I'm gonna do this without reading glasses.
Oh, that's even more impressive.
Let's pick someone.
Please, someone. I hate to do that. All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Right. I will, like I said, we have coffee afterwards. Okay. All right, so let's just, I might have one or two more, but I won't do one. I won't do one. Okay.
Oh,
Can we begin with that? We're going to go backwards if you don't mind. So let's say that today, you might be watching television. Now we know that we have Telemundo and Univision, and I would love to talk about that later on, okay? Because people always ask me these kinds of lectures about why do we have Telemundo and Univision, kind of networks, and we'll discuss it. But today you might be able to watch a program on TV, a commercial on television, and the one that always gets my attention is the Audi commercial with the salsa music being played and the Latina woman driving the car, right?
Yeah.
And at the end it says the Audi A4 series, beginning at 45,000, something like that. And that in itself sends a very powerful message. It's really in terms of semiotics, right? About the fact that any one of us could relate to that woman. That commercial 40 years ago would not have taken place. In terms of again of a brown Latina woman playing salsa music, driving down the highway, and us connecting to her. Okay. So there's a lot of change. You can go to a store and see advertisement in Spanish, perhaps. In fact, you can go on live and you go to MSNBC and they have the Spanish. In fact, they have two kinds of different spaces. They have the Spanish for the Spanish American people, that we speak Spanish, and then you have some Spanish for Latin America, for example, right? Spaces. So, but it's not uncommon for you to see again advertisement that might target, again, that community, that particular community, Latino community. And so, but historically, as we go back, again, things were quite different, okay? And do you mind reading that right now? Maybe begin with the, I think I highlighted that part. Right there.
okay.
Really loud, really powerful.
During the summer of 1955, my entire family decided to go to Gomez Palacio, Durango for our cousin's wedding. For most of us, it was the first time that we would travel more than 100 miles from home, and the first time we would cross the Southwest from San Diego to El Paso, before heading south towards Gomez. We spent weeks getting ready for this trip. There would be 20 of us traveling together. For all the kids, it was the greatest time of our lives, a chance to see a whole new world. It was July, so we left at 2 in the morning in order to cross the desert during the coolness of the night and early morning. But by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we were hot and thirsty. By now we had left California and Arizona behind. Near Las Cruces, New Mexico, we saw a small store next to a gas station. Dad pulled over. This was a good time to get gas for the car and something to drink for the family. As usual, all the kids had to get off and pick their own drink. But as we came near the door, there was the sign, "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." Dad turned around and tried to hide the sign from us, saying they won't have what we wanted, and we would try the next stop. We became afraid. We had never seen a sign like that before. In the car, we asked him why we hadn't stopped and what the sign meant. He said to us, there are people in this country who hate us and will try anything to make us feel less than we are. They use those things in their power to make us go away, but we won't. I refuse to give my business and my money to people who think that we are less than them. We are not animals, we are human beings. Always be proud of who and what you are, and don't let them treat you any less. For the next 30 minutes, we were very quiet, thinking of the sign, of Dad and his words. That day, Dad gave us the best gift any father could give, the gift of love, dignity, and courage.
Thank you. So this is a true, all true, of course, story statements that happened. And again, this is very difficult, so I understand that, and let's talk about these things in context, right? In context, so that we're not offended or we don't hurt each other's feelings. So this is 1955, and very interesting to me to look at this establishment, a business whose main agenda is to create what? Make, if you're a business, you want to make money, profit, right? And yet there's a certain luxury to this establishment to say we will not serve Mexicans or dogs, right? You know, it tells us something that science says so much about, for example, economic power. What does it say about economic power in the Latino Mexicano community? Is there any economic power?
No.
There is none. I mean, for a business to say we will not sell you our product, we don't care. Because the father is saying, well, I refuse to give you my business. Well, they don't even want your business. Okay? So economic power is of course completely absent. Is there any political power? There's no political power either, because you know, no one is sort of standing up and saying this is wrong. In fact, it's illegal. It's a complicated mess, and we can maybe one day we can come back, or you can take my class, or you can read my book. Okay, several books in the library for free. You don't have to buy those. I donated about 7 books that I have written to the library, and so I talk a lot about these concepts. And so the point would be that Mexican origin people, in fact, have been labeled as Caucasians historically. If you look at my birth certificate, it says white next to it. And that's an old conflict historically. But the point I'm trying to make is that you have the jure segregation and de facto segregation historically in our country, right? And the Mexican origin people, in fact, were not that it's right, of course, to segregate legally, but they were not to be segregated, right, at all, in any kind of establishment. As you know, this ends in 1964, with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But before this, you have the facto segregation, which means it's factual habits, even though it's not legal, and you have the jure segregation, which is legal segregation, for example, against African Americans, right? And so, again, it's really powerful to look at this sign, this advertisement, or this sign that says, we don't want your business. There's no economic power, there's no political power, and there's certainly no social power that exists. So again, we're going back into history, right, and see how did this come about, all this tension, all this prejudice on all sides of this discourse, okay? And maybe we can go back to the Second World War. Let me set you up. During the Second World War, you have some interesting things going on. On the one hand, of course, tremendous fear, right, in our country about maybe internal enemies. You know, we know what happens with Japanese Americans, for example. It's a fear also with Mexico, Mexican Americans, Latinos, because of the history of tensions with Latin America and Mexico. Part of that is that during the First World War, Germany had asked the Mexican Republic to attack the United States. And upon victory, they were going to return back to the Southwest to Mexico. As you know, this was at one point Mexican territory. So it was known as the Zimmerman Note. And there was a lot of tension and bias that existed. But you also had the Bracero program, which was a program that brought to this country 5 million Mexican workers during the war and after the war. And you had also an alliance eventually between the United States and Mexico against the Axis powers. In fact, helped one of my friends from San Diego State on a book, and in the research that we were doing, I found a poster from the Second World War that had a hand, 2 hands. One was clearly a brown Mexican hand, had a sombrero on it, you know, those big charro sombreros. And the other hand was a white hand that had Uncle Sam's hat, you know. And the poster said amigos, said friends, you know, that there was a friendship that existed, right? But despite that, you have, again, tremendous tension that does exist, racial animosity, I repeat, on all sides. And let me stop myself for 1 second. But anyways, this is part of this whole problem here. This is 19, what is this, 19? Oh, this is the Second World War. Go ahead and read this.
Their Mexican minds run to nothing higher than animal functions, eat, sleep, and sexual debauchery. In every huddle of Mexican shacks, one meets the same idleness, hordes of hungry dogs and filthy children with faces plastered with flies, disease, lice, human filth, stench, promiscuous fornication, bastardy, lounging, apathetic peons, and lazy squaws, fiends, and dried chili, liquor, general squalor, and envy and hatred of the gringo. These people sleep by day and prowl by night like coyotes, stealing anything they can get their hands on, no matter how useless to them it may be. Nothing left outside is safe unless padlocked or chained down. Yet there are Americans clamoring for more of this human swine to be brought over from Mexico.
Okay, so this is actually a congressional debate, okay, that took place. And what you have here is, his name was John Box, and he was a representative for Texas at this time. And you have this report also prepared by Dr. Roy L. Garris from Vanderbilt University, and they prepared this report for Congress on debate on immigration, right, from Mexico. And so, if you notice again what you read, thank you for that, it really highlights some of these stereotypes that exist, right? There's this disease that's coming across, violence. You got to make sure you pick, everything is padlocked or chained down. They will steal it, even if they don't need it. And this idea that these people, all they do is eat, sleep, and have what? Have sex. Which I wish my life was like that. That would be pretty cool. It's very, it's very, but it's very animalistic, right? It's like an animal would do that. You know what I'm saying? It's like so you have, again, these statements are coming from Congress. It's not someone just at a bar with ignorance and biases on either side of this, this debate or discourse making these comments. These are politicians, and these, of course, are also scholars who are writing this, and this is congressional debate that is taking place. One more. Can I beg you, please, to read this? This is the Second World War. Someone else? Double credit. Oh, there's one back here. Thank you. This is also the Second World War. Okay. In the Second World War, thank you, Mexican Americans really wanted to be seen as Americans. Okay, so one of the things they did is they joined the military, and in doing so, the Mexican Americans were the the first group, with the most decorations of any ethnic group in the United States for their effort in valor in the Second World War. Despite that, there are some tensions that existed there, and this highlights those tensions, if you don't mind.
Although the report admitted that discrimination against Chicanos in employment, education, schooling, recreation, and labor unions was common, it concluded that Chicanos were inherently criminal and violent. Aries stated that Chicanos were Indians, that Indians were Orientals, and that Orientals had an utter disregard for life. Therefore, because Chicanos had this inborn characteristic, they were too violent. The report further alleged that Chicanos were cruel, for they descended from the Aztecs, who supposedly sacrificed 30,000 victims a day. Ayres wrote that Indians considered leniency a sign of weakness, pointing to the Mexican government's treatment of the Indians, which he maintained was quick and severe. He urged that all gang members be imprisoned and that all Chicano youths over the age of 18 be given the option of working or enlisting in the armed forces. Chicanos, according to Ayres, could not change their spots. They had an innate desire to use a knife and let blood, and this inborn cruelty was aggravated by liquor and jealousy. The Ayres report, which represented the official law enforcement views, goes a long way in explaining the events around Sleepy Lagoon.
Thank you very much. So this is the LAPD official policy during the Second World War, despite again the highly decorated youth who were fighting in the war from Mexican American ancestry for their country. There was this official LAPD policy, right? They are basically functioning on the premise that children who were Latino or Mexican children were inherently what? What was their nature? Violent by nature, very violent by nature. Not it was, they argue, because they were Indians, again, using the popular term Indians, right? And they said Indians are, and they're also Orientals. That goes way back to the Beringia Land Bridge. It goes way back to the Bering Strait and really human beings entering this part of the world. But if you ever have a chance to look at the trials from that period, such as the Sleepy Lagoon trial that at the end she mentioned, you'll notice that the prosecution argued violence by nature, and that was pretty much accepted back then. Your Honor, they're Mexican kids, and therefore they like to kill. And if you give them a weapon, and if you have jealousy, jealousy. That's what she read. If you have jealousy and liquor, it's going to result for sure in some kind of death of some kind. So it is an innate desire, right, is what she said, to kill someone. So there's this grotesque description, again, official, right, use of the Latino community as violent. Let's do two more. I think we're hitting the target pretty good. You want to do yours? Thank you. This is a pedagogical debate in 1916, I believe it is. Yes. Go for it.
There is italic.
What did italic say?
Among
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
among laboring men and servant girls, there are thousands like them. The tests have told the truth. These boys are uneducable beyond the merest rudiment of training. No amount of school instruction will ever make them intelligent voters or capable citizens. They represent the level of intelligence which is very, very common among Spanish, Indian, and Mexican families of the Southwest, and also among Negroes. Their dualness seems to be racial, or at least inherent in the family stock from which they came. The fact that ones meet this type with such extraordinary frequency among Indians, Mexicans, and Negroes suggests quite forcibly that the whole question of racial difference in mental trait will have to be taken up anew and by experimental methods. The writer predicts that when this is done, there will be discovered enormously significant racial difference in general intelligence, difference which cannot be whipped out by any sheen of mental culture. Children of this group should be segregated in special classes and will be given instruction which is concrete and practical. They cannot master abstraction, but they can often be made efficient workers, able to look out for themselves. There is no possibility at present of convincing society that they should not be allowed to reproduce. Although from a eugenic point of view, they constitute a grave problem because of their unusual prolific breeding.
Thank you. So this is again a pedagogical debate about whether or not, how, if you can, how do you educate these communities, African American, Mexican American, Asian American, American. Can you educate them? Can they be educated? If not, you have to create separate schools. In other words, it gives, of course, legitimacy to the argument of separation, right? So everybody equal. And it says you have to somehow make them efficient workers. Maybe they can do something because they cannot handle complex equations, when you read, right? They cannot handle complex equations. You have to make them somehow efficient members of society. And at the end, it says, by the way, we have to do something because at this point, no one is yet considering the possibility of not allowing them to do what? To, anyone catch that? Reproduce. You know, no one has basically accepted the idea that these communities should not be allowed to reproduce. Okay, and so again, this is getting. We're going back, and you can see more and more racial tension and animosity. Let's go back a bit more, and then we'll bring it back to the present and see how, you know, a TV commercial, whether it's the Chihuahua, right, dog or anything else, for one community it might be very offensive, for the other one it's kind of just cute, you know, kind of thing. But we'll come back to that. This is super important, so, yeah, extreme racism, if you don't mind, really hard.
Extreme racism also played a major role in the post-war conflict. Major William H. Emery stated in a report on the United States and Mexican boundary survey in 1859, the white race was exterminating or crushing out the inferior race. Others echoed his remarks. A United States soldier in the same year noted that the Mexican, like the poor Indian, is doomed to retire before the more enterprising Anglo-Americans.
Matt, can I stop you ever so often if you don't mind? Can I stop you there? So there's already, this is a war, of course, as you might know, there's a war between the United States and Mexico, right? 1846-48. Ironically enough, in 1824, it was the Mexican government that opened their border to American colonists to move into Texas. The very first American to come in with families was named Stephen Austin, from we get Austin, Texas. Okay? And then we have Sam Houston, we get Houston, Texas, right? But there was racial animosity and tensions that quickly, of course, exploded, right? And in fact, interesting enough, in 1829, Mexico made it illegal for Americans to enter Mexican territory, right? But obviously that did not work very well, much like our laws do not work very well today in the southern border. So there's a whole tension historically that is there. A war spot, Mexico will lose about half of their territory, okay? Half of their territory becomes U.S. territory, all the way up to Wyoming, Utah, across to the Pacific Ocean, right? And eventually they sign a treaty that is known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, okay? And this particular treaty, what it's going to do is going to establish peace, but also establish civic and property rights for people of Mexican descent. Amongst, part of the problem would be that now you have people who, again, think about this, this is very important. You have people who do not fit the stereotype or the prototype of who is an American. In other words, you and I were into high school and we grew up hearing about the WASP. Remember the WASP? White, Anglo, Saxon, Protestant? You never heard about that before? The WASP? Yeah. White, Anglo, Saxon, Protestant. In other words, this was sort of the stereotype or the prototype of who we were as Americans pre-1850. Now suddenly this treaty says, by the way, some of these mestizo Catholic Mexicans can also be U.S. citizens. At the end of the war, and the treaty says these mestizos, what's the word mestizo mean, by the way? Racially mixed people, right? So most of us who are, about 85% of us who are Mexican ancestry, we are racially mixed people. We speak, well, we are African, we are Asian, we are Native, we are European. This mixture of cultures. And so, but that again went against the idea of who an American was. Therefore, at the end of the war, despite the treaty, suddenly you have these tensions that are there. This argument that there's an inferior people and a superior people, right, in place. But they're both, by that time, could be citizens. One, again, is seen as the sort of one is more enterprising, is what you read, right, correct? If you're enterprising, you're working, you're progressing, you're future-oriented. The opposite of that would be sort of to be lazy, you know, be sort of backward, you know. This idea of laziness to me is very interesting because you missed it, but when I was growing up, when I was your age, we had, I think it was El Taco or Taco Bell, that had that all over the restaurants, if we can call them restaurants, establishments, perhaps a better word, they had a Mexican guy, kind of chubby, with a huge sombrero, right, taking a siesta, taking a nap, what was he resting on? Does anyone remember that sign? Was see that sign? That's a cactus of all things. I mean, that must have hurt. You know, so on top of lazy, he's kind of a little bit pendejo, I guess, because, you know, that's not the best place to take a nap in a cactus, you know. And so it conveys, again, this imagery, right, of sort of backward, lazy, not producing. But it's also, sometimes if you watch the more newer commercials, like the Corona commercials, I know that for us as hardworking Americans, every day in and out in traffic, you name it, you go turn your TV and there's that Corona commercial, right, where there's like 2 Corona beers at the beach, and then the waves go, and then it comes slowly, I want to go there kind of thing, you know, because somehow it's slower. But it conveys this image of something that is slow, the opposite of us, productive, fast, okay? Please go on, excellent work.
Frederick Olmsted noted that Mexicans were seen not as heretics or heathens to be converted, but rather as vermin to be exterminated. Mexicans were bitterly resented for their amalgamation or assimilation through
miscegenation. I make up words to sound intelligent, is what I do, but again, this whole argument is that the Mexican origin population really was the antithesis to the idea of who was an American. And let me prove that to you real quickly. In Spanish, we might say, ojalá que mañana llueva para tomar chocolate. Chocolate, okay? In English, roughly translated, hopefully tomorrow will rain so I can drink some chocolate. But in me saying ojalá, mañana, llueva, chocolate, there are 3 different roots, right, of this cultural, you know, mestizaje of sorts. We have ojalá. Does anyone know what the root of that is?
Arabic.
It's Arabic, exactly. It's Arabic, right? It is Arabic. And then you have llover, rain, right, which is Spanish. But what about chocolate? Or guacamole? Molcajete?
Native American.
Native American, they're Nahuatl words, they're Aztec words, right? And actually words of the Aztec nation, of Aztec people. a lot of the words that we use that we swear they're Spanish are not Spanish. They're indigenous words. And for example, probably the one that you heard the most if you speak Spanish is maybe mi cuate, my friend. The word cuate comes from the word cuatl, which means snake. And you see the snake a lot in the Aztec, right, or Mayan. Quetzalcoatl, the feather Aztec, for example, king god. And so a lot of this simplifies again how racially mixed this is. At a time when you're coming out of a Elizabethan era where racial purity was espoused. The Mexican is pretty racially effed up. Excuse me, Professor. In that argument of racial purity, the Mexican is pretty racially messed up, let's put it that way, okay? And so this is where those tensions come from. How can this person be me? Again, think in context. Go on, if you don't mind.
Edward B. Foote wrote in his renowned medical reference book on the subject of marriage that the Mexican population is divided between mestizos, mulattoes, and zambos, many of whom are but little above the savage, go naked, have no established forms of marriage. Those who do not associate with and imitate the customs of the whites are omnigamic and governed by their impulses. Continue?
Oh, please. Yes.
These statements were often supported by distinguished scholars such as Joseph Sims, who compiled a massive, celebrated college textbook that went through 10 editions. Those of Indian background, Sims wrote, had a face that clearly betray a degenerate nature. He stressed that dark races, like the Indian and Negro, are naturally revengeful, like the elephant, and black eyes evince more or less a revengeful disposition. He concluded that dark people, especially those of Indian blood, had a wide mouth, a narrow face, that may safely be defined as indicative of animal imitation. Since Mexicans were viewed as inferior, they were merely excluded from the human race. Continue?
One more sentence.
Their physical appearance and conduct made it possible to regard them as repulsive. In 1874,
that's fine. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You got it.
So anyways, look, we can go on and on now. Okay, so the whole point is that I can send you stuff if you want to read it. I have several articles that you can have for. Obviously, they're free. I can give those to you. And my books are in the library. A lot of what I discuss in my classes, of course, I teach Chicano history and I teach political economy of the Mexican American people. Are these historically tensions that involve racism and prejudice, frankly. And one of the things that I have written recently about is why it is that Mexican origin youth in particular, why they seek their definition, they seek their membership, even though they were born and raised in the United States, why we continue to seek our membership in Mexico with Mexican roots. In other words, they have young kids who were born, raised in this country, but when you ask us what we are, we say we are American. We don't say we're American, in fact. We say we are Mexicans. And people will say, well, where were you born? I was born in LA. Well, even worse, I was born in Berkeley. And have you been to Mexico? I've been there once teaching. Well, how do you say you're Mexican if you were not, maybe culturally, but perhaps certainly you're not Mexican? In fact, the Mexicans don't even say we're Mexicans. The Mexicans have for a long time called us pochos, right? Anyone here with Mexican ancestry? The term pocho has been used for decades to refer to someone like me. And that P-O-C-H-O, the word pocho translates roughly to coconut. A coconut. What does that mean? I am brown on the outside, but I am white on the inside. And there's a way of saying, hey man, you don't even speak Spanish correctly. Go on, please.
Isn't the Chicano like that same thing as well?
The term Chicano is not like, excellent point. The term Chicano, Mexicans like my father do not like it, the old timers. Because for them it means like some kind of like cholo studies or gang studies or something like that. They see it in that kind of context. Why? Because our parents were what is known from the Mexican American generation, very passive. They want to change, but they don't want to cause any problems. Because historically, you can see why that was the case. The Chicano generation, like the black movement in the 1960s and 70s, was very, very different in the approach of, again, having power and demanding, of course, change. And that, to our parents, was very militant, very aggressive, and perhaps even dangerous. And so the term Chicano itself, I think you're right, is not cared for. because, but it really highlights again how this cultural struggle for space, for membership, for identity. I did a study on semiotics and tattoos, and I went to 3 different spaces. I went to prison, not myself, as a scholar, get to prison. I went to universities, okay, and then I just walked down barrios, up and down the county, right? And I would ask, in something very scary, situation, I would ask mainly Latino youth, of course, hey, listen, can I ask you about your tattoo? And what is it, and why did you choose that? In other words, I was doing semiotics, right? This semiotics is the science of symbols, right? And so consistently across the different spaces, there were 3 typical images. One that were used, right, as tattoos. One was La Virgen de Guadalupe, which is the patron saint of Mexico, the Catholic. She's Mary, but Mexicanized. Okay, and then you have we have Quetzalcoatl, which is again the god of peace and knowledge. He's the feather serpent that you might see in certain murals in Chicano Park, for example. And then we had Tonatiuh, which is also or a variation of the sun, of the Aztec sun or canopy, some kind of variation of that. But all the time, when I would ask people, why would you have this tattoo? It was always the same answer, whether you were talking to a prisoner, a pinto, or talking to a PhD at UCSD or UCLA, or talking to some 18-year-old kid in Barrio Logan. Their answer was because we are somehow Mexican, we're Mexican. So their identity, their membership, again, even though perhaps they've never even been there, continue to be that they were Mexican. So I've been writing about this lately, and about, of course, how that produces, of course, tensions, right, in terms of membership. Now, in order to explain why it is that they have this struggle for membership in space and identity, I again go back into history like we just did. Here's why they don't feel very American. Historically, they have been marginalized and not seen themselves as Americans. I myself, again, even though I was born and raised here, probably the only time I say I'm American is when I cross the border. I'm like waving my passport saying here, America, right? But it has a lot to do again with historical experience. Now, look at all these stereotypes, and getting back to our original purpose of this presentation. Now that we have gone back into history, we've seen some of the stereotypes in media. Do you see any programs or shows that highlight that? Any movies you can think about? Maybe you can talk to me about that. What is out there? And maybe even news. Maybe events that are going on. Politics, anything.
Yeah.
Think about.
Blood in, blood out.
Okay, Blood in, Blood out. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of films. I don't know that there's a Chicano film that does not involve violence in some major way. Even La Bamba had violence. That was kind of a movie about music, But there's always this collision between maybe law enforcement and the community, right? Again, very graphic. The other one, American Me, was incredibly violent film. And if you ever have a chance to see that, don't watch it with kids. It's very graphic, very violent film. But the title American Me, in fact, is about the struggle between someone that is of Mexican descent and also American, right, ancestor. In fact, the Olmos, which is apparently the only actor we have in the community, he's in every single film you can think about, James Edwards Olmos. But he plays the child that is produced as a result of a rape, in the Second World War. And that produces this anger and frustration. So again, the argument by the producers in some of the extras from the film is that this rape that you see in this individual, forget the actor, the name of the person that he plays in that film, but that rage, I think his last name is Quintana, right? The anger, the violence comes again from this experience of being both Mexican and being American. Anyway, yeah, please.
Well, I was just gonna ask, what about like that movie that was actually banned in the United States, the one about the underground miners or something? They were
Los
doing bad.
Mineros, is that the one you're talking about?
Los Mineros, yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty good film. Again, you have some good films out there that even then highlight perhaps the hard work, part of that. Los Mineros is pretty. Looks into what happened to the Mexicans that were brought in to work in the American mines, and how they were dying, in great numbers because of course exposure to the elements and the dangers of mining. But there's some films out there again that do highlight some of the contribution, but often again they are themselves either not seen by many or somehow blocked from the main media. Anyone else? What programs do you watch on
What is
TV?
that show with George Lopez?
Yeah, George Lopez. And again, George Lopez played into the whole stereotypes, right? He had, it was George Lopez and also, but George Lopez was different in the sense that he was sort of your, maybe lower middle class. He had a nice house, right? Beautiful kids, went to school, they struggled, but he had this mother that drank a lot, right? But there's the other guy that I was thinking about before George Lopez. We had the, he's also a Mexican comedian. Not even Mencia, he's a
Gabriel
right?
Iglesias.
No, yeah, he's good too, but I'm taking you guys way back. It's not even fair for you, because I'm taking you back to the 80s.
Cheech Marin.
Well, we had Cheech, who was always getting high. But there was another guy who would always come out and say, Americans have credit cards, and then he takes out a knife, I forget his name.
I think I know who you're talking about.
He was back in the 80s, but again, even they play along with these stereotypes. But George Lopez was one, and it was maybe some good things about it. Perhaps for some people they were offensive in some ways. Yes, Maggie.
Oh, the movie that's out now. I just saw it. It's End of Watch.
And the watch. I've not seen that. No.
It's good. It's about like two policemen that are going out on I don't know. They just discover some pretty crazy things.
Mexican drug cartel, I think, is what it's
Okay.
targeting.
Yeah, the drug ones. I think it's a big one right now because when you see the news, and when you see, in fact, I not long ago went with my wife to see a film about drug violence that had.
Trafficking.
It wasn't trafficking. It was one recently released with Selma Hayek, came out. And again, it was very, very violent and killing and all kinds of horrors that are going on. But one of the things that I thought was interesting again is that in this whole violence associated with drugs, it's often seen again as a Latin American, Colombian, Mexican, sort of problem, when a lot of it has to do with consumption as well, right, in the United States. And so again, whether it's our news or whether it is even films, this consistent portrayal, again, of the drug violence as being something that it's there. Just yesterday I was watching Scarface. We just flipping their channels and there's Scarface going way back to I guess 82, 84, whenever that was produced. And it's stuck in our minds. What was that famous quote that me, my little friend, something like
Say
that?
hello to my little
Say
friend.
hello to my little friend. He has a big old machine gun, and they stay here. And so. But again, as somebody mentioned before, you watch programs and the Latinos are either the maids or they're the cooks. And by the way, often that happens even in Mexican soap operas, right? The actual racial stereotyping in Mexican media is very typical. In my classes, I discuss Mexican racism, and my students who are often mostly Latinos, they really hate it because in their minds, to be racist, you have to be what? Don't be afraid, to be white. In their minds, that's what it means, How can I be racist about Mexican? Well, let me tell you, here's the endless ways you can be. But again, you have images, right, in soap operas and in films. I'm thinking of Sofia Vergara, for example, right, in this Modern Family. I mean, this is like this sex symbol, pretty much, and you see that historically, If you're going to make it, you have to be this Latina that is just, sexy. So the sex symbol, and that's your part. But more than that, you have in images and films and in any kind of media. Again, you see consistency. What we see here in the board. Last year, I was asked by the San Diego Union Tribune if I wanted to be in their Latino advisory board, and I jumped on the opportunity. Though something happened, I guess, politically, because I didn't get chosen. But I had said yes because I wanted to be able to be part of that newspaper somehow, and hopefully have them report more balanced, right, news. Whenever you open the paper, at least I see all these horrible things, right? And I thought, well, personally, I know a lot of really nice things that are happening in the community, again, the Latino community in the United States, that I hope will be also part of the newspaper, not just all the violence that gets reported. But anything else you can think about in terms of commercials, anything?
Music.
Music, okay. Talk about it, yeah.
Yeah, there was a very famous song, a music video by this Puerto Rican group, Wisin y Yandel.
Yeah.
Talks about the law in Arizona, about how discriminatory it could be.
Good. I was going to say also cartoons. In my political economy class, I happen to do political cartoons, and I got some really interesting ones. There's one that, probably the most common one, was one where a police officer, two of them that I got consistently, a police officer stops a Latino person in his car, obviously, and the police officer has, what are they called? You know when you go to Home Depot, maybe you don't go to Home Depot, but one day you will. And they have those different color thingies, you know, like little samples of different colors of colors, different samples of colors.
Paint
Paint samples. And so the officer is there with the Latino person, and he's trying to see how dark he is based on the different colors. And so, you know, to determine whether or not he should ask for identification, right? Again, some of these things you have to, you know, take them with a grain of salt. The other one, there's a police officer asking someone, show me your documents to make sure you are legal in the United States. And the guy says, do you want me to do that before or after I finish mowing your lawn? You know? and so, again, you have cartoons, you have programs, you have obviously the news. All these, if you stop for, for a minute or go home today and look at the media, different media, and see how they might begin to perpetuate or maybe hopefully are breaking down, some of these stereotypes that exist. But do know again that they have a historical, root, right? And I always see ourselves as having a mission to try to talk about these very uncomfortable things and try to create, obviously, a more equal and fair society. I know that, for example, I come from a very homophobic culture and community. My family is very homophobic. And if I could tell you on every single day the things that I hear, and I'm consistently trying to educate my family about that issue. Let me quickly end with this. And hopefully you have questions. My brother married an African-American woman, and that was like horrible, okay? And if you are, and let's be honest, if you are Latino, female, for example, the worst boyfriend you can bring home will be a black boyfriend, okay? And that is very colonial racism that has penetrated the community through generations, right? I remember that my brother dated Lindia for, we went to UCSD for, I would say about 8 years, and he never brought her home. We had heard about her. Lindia sounds kind of Mexican, but one day finally he brought her home, and mom and dad and this is Lindia, we're gonna get married. My parents were like, boom, they almost collapsed. What time do you guys leave here?
Oh, in an hour.
Okay, and so they had like this, they had a count, about the fact that my brother was going to marry a black woman who was not Catholic, talking again about stereotypes, and who was older than he was. All kinds of things that he did wrong, yes, from their perspective. And so everyone was just shocked, and I was like, what? Why are you guys reacting like this? Here is someone calling my dad a wetback, and yet he said, yeah, but we're not black, and type of thing. And like, I used, this is, to me, was very frustrating that time of my life. And I remember my brother was, in love, he's still in love, beautiful family. And, but people were just really, really biased towards this relationship. My grandmother, of all people, a pillar of the Catholic Church in Mexico, she would often ask me, Hijo José Rodolfo, ¿qué tan negra es esa mujer? Like, how dark is she? She would ask me that, my grandma. And I would say, I would joke with her, but she never thought it was funny. I would say, oh, negra con la noche, abuelita, she's dark as night. One time, this is a true story, I found, I don't know where, in fact I don't remember, but I found, those postcards, those Christmas cards that you find in big old boxes, that say you're the only one for me kind of thing, But I bought this, and they had it was a black Jesus. It was Jesus Christ crucified, but he was black. And so I bought a bunch of those, and I began to give them to my family, right? Trying to provoke some kind of intellectual, theological discussion, which of course did not happen, right? The contrary, I was accused of blasphemy, I'm sure, by several people. But just this resistance to the idea, right, of someone else, so when the kids were born, this is true, when the kids were born, people would call the hospital or our parents, and they would ask. They would ask about the children, and they would ask what? What color? Mexicans or Latinos in general have ways of asking such questions, okay? And because in all of our families, always skin color has been used. Even in German, people will have la güera, like for example, I have a niece, and she's La Güera, which in English really translates to what? To the white one, or the blonde one, basically, you know? Blondie, exactly. And Sofia is her name, and she's the one. And then we'll have El Prieto, or El Negro, right, in our family. And Prieto means he's a little bit dark, but not darkest. El Negro is definitely the darkest. And that guy, my cousin, Juan Carlos, in our family is El Negro. His mom will say to me, dile al negro que venga para acá, which in English means go tell the black one to come over here, you know? But again, she's not being biased. She's actually, you know, it's an endearment. But it connotes, again, the skin color, right? It's very colonial. If you go back to Spain, Spanish colonial America, there was a caste system that was in place, right? And skin color was basically used to determine what position you had. So it's a lot to deal with, even in our own family, certainly in the media, to break down these stereotypes, right? And to try to see where they come from. And I do believe that they begin with us in our families and trying to educate ourselves about diversity. You know, we're a diverse nation. We always really have. Perhaps we didn't see ourselves as such, but we always have been multicultural. At any rate, can I answer any questions before my time is done here? Please.
Why or how do you think stereotypes occur?
You know,
You don't like people, or you're like.
I think it's maybe just one of those human conditions, our fear, our ignorance, you know. I think if you go back pretty much from any culture, they're going to be present, right? And often perhaps is something that we don't know about or are comfortable with, you know. I mean, we see that, right? I tell my students again that we had our very first Muslim family move into the neighborhood, you know, and they live almost across from me. And I've noticed that no one has gone over there yet to take an apple pie or something like that. You know, everyone else that moves in, we're like, hi, we're the Jacobos, and here's your pie. You know, no one has gone over there yet. You know, and I don't know that we know how to approach them, right? And seriously, because again, they look different from us, they dress different from us. So I noticed some tension that is there. I'm not saying there's racism or bias. I'm just saying that we're like, we don't know, maybe we'll offend them if we take something, you know. And the funniest thing happened just this weekend. We have teenagers, right? And they were fighting, they were arguing. And the little boy called the girl a B, the B word. And the reason why I'm saying it is like, I thought to myself, that's not so different from what I hear from anyone else here on the street. You know, kids fighting and they're cussing at each other. In other words, it's what we don't know often. It scares us, right? And we begin to create these stereotypes. And again, like I tell you, they could be ridiculous and even funny, but in the wrong minds, right? And in the wrong elements of society, historically, they have been very dangerous, and they can end up rationalizing segregation, genocide, right? If you look at it from that perspective. So those stereotypes can have tremendous, negative, impact. How you educate people. We saw that again from your reading. If you believe they cannot handle complex equations, if women should not go to school, kind of thing, then institutions begin to perpetuate that kind of mentality, right? Society begins to accept things as such. And again, there are different scenarios where that plays out. From the officer who stopped me, thinking that I look like someone else, to the person who might ask me if how much I charge for landscaping. You name it. They're uncomfortable and they're painful, and we have to obviously again be careful. One last story, and then
well, I was going to say just one thing. That I think one reason also might be a boundary maintenance mechanism. So that as a group wants to make sure they maintain the integrity of their community, that then they have to dismiss those around them and exclude them. And it is kind of a fear, it could be a fear, but I think also in a positive sense for themselves to maintain their culture.
Yeah, I think you're right. And by the way, you can see that right now in politics, right, in the campaigns. It's like one group says, well, they're liberal, and that means something really, there's a stereotype about liberals. And they're conservative, and we have, full of stereotypes about what they're like, that whole thing. And it does, again, maybe protect spaces, right, and that's create boundaries as well. But it can block, progress, and whether it's political or any other kind. I like to tell a lot of stories, so people allow me to tell you one last one before I'm kicked out by your professor here. But my last semester at San Diego State, I was teaching. I was walking to the parking lot, and they have these huge parking structures, and they can be very dangerous places, unfortunately. But I guess I wasn't dressed very professorial, and I'm walking, and there's a young lady in front of me who begins to look back towards me, and she looked rather distraught, she looked worried, My very first reaction, to be honest with you, was anger. I got mad because, when you are stereotyped, when you are profiled, there's frustration there, right? I just, I'm a professor here. I'm a pretty popular professor here, that type of thing. And, but, I noticed that she was just really, really feeling, she seemed scared, frankly. And then I began to think, well, maybe there's a reason for that, and I should give her more space. And so I went from feeling angry to saying, well, maybe more like sympathy or trying to understand her concerns. This is, again, a very dangerous part of campus. So I began to walk slower, Unfortunately for us, we're both going to the exact same place. And we're both going down these crazy, those round stairs that go all the way from 8th to the last floor. So we're going like this, I'm trying to walk slow so I give her more space. She keeps turning back. But unfortunately, again, we end up on the exact same bottom floor. The parking floor. And I'm about maybe 30 feet behind her. She's walking faster, looking back. At one point, she goes toward a car to try to get in or pretend like she's getting in the car to see how I will react. The only problem was the car she was trying to get into was was my car.
Your car. Oh, no.
My car, seriously. So I didn't want to say, stop, what the heck are you doing breaking into my car? I just thought, my God, this poor woman's traumatized. I didn't know if I can say, hey, can I help you? Because that's my car. At that moment, all I could think is, just keep walking and by. I did. I walked by her and I said, have a good afternoon, take care of yourself. And I walked to the storage part of the structure and I stayed there while she got in her car, and then she left, and then I came back and got in my car and I went home. And I would have loved to talk to her, and said, whatever happened, maybe I can help you, I can take you to your car, kind of thing. But it's one of those things that you'll never know. I never know why she was scared of me. I have assumptions, something might have happened, or could have happened, or stereotypes, who knows, right? But it's those kinds of things that if you take that experience and multiply it, right, by so many times, and then how media game, plays this role. There is violence. There are drugs, there are bad people in every community, but there are some very beautiful people also in all of our communities, and that's hopefully what we can focus on. And again, the role of media can be so important on what messages are portrayed, right? And if we watch a commercial, if we watch a movie, for example, or a cartoon on the newspaper, a popular cartoon. It's funny because I now have young kids and we watch television together. Sometimes they're watching those old cartoons from the 1960s and 70s, and some of those are full of biases. They're watching Yogi Bear, the little bear, the bear, right?
Yeah, Yogi Bear.
And Yogi Bear, they had a guest from a Japanese bear that came to visit, Yellowstone, whatever it is. And so this Japanese bear comes over to visit, but the way they made the Japanese bear look, of course, was full of stereotypes, right? And so there's this, very stereotypical. Much like you might see the old cartoons of a Native American, or you might see maybe Speedy Gonzalez, and running around with his big hat. And so they portray these stereotypes of people, right? And it's what I'm telling you. But anyways, I'll be quiet. Any other questions before please?
I don't know if this is any other person's view, but with politics right now, do you feel that they're trying to use things that they're supposedly going to help out the Hispanic community with, just to kind of, because they kind of feel that Hispanics kind of just see someone as saying like, oh, this person's going to help us out, and then they just tell everyone else to like vote for that person, and they try and like hook them with like something small just to get them fed in and take the votes?
I think so. I've been commenting lately that I think, that Obama's immigration policies in the last 3-4 months, I'm sure, have a lot to do with the Latino vote, right? Mm-hmm. For example, deferred action. Have you heard about deferred action? Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay, when he came into the presidency, he promised us immigration reform of some kind. Think about politics and immigration. It's a very, very, contentious topic, and no one wants to really talk about media and politics. when McCain and Obama ran against each other for the presidency 4 years ago, I don't know who was counting exactly, but only 11 times, was the word immigration ever said by them. And McCain said it more than even Obama, right? And so it's a word that, again, can get you in a lot of trouble, or if you have to, maybe you can certainly get some support from that, right? But notice that certainly I think Romney is not saying a whole lot about, Obama's being very careful about exactly what he says. But deferred action and the fact that you cannot now deport, at least for 2 years, the undocumented youth is in itself, I think, to some extent, a political move. The other time that I saw it was with Prop 8, and you had tremendous advertisement in Spanish with Prop 8, and sort of going after the Catholic, Latino vote, certainly in California, in this case, and the idea, of course, of marriage, right? And so I thought it was very interesting because we had these debates at the time when we're trying to look into how here's this very conservative, community or group in California trying to get the Latinos to support, will be against gay marriage. But the very same group was more than willing to deport these same people if they could, or deport their family members. So, but it is something, again, stereotyping as well exists in politics. And to assume that all Latinos go for Obama, for example, is a stereotype in itself. But it's very present, I would say, in the political sphere as well. Any last questions, my friends? Maybe you can teach me about media one of these days, whatever you do with those computers. Come back for a workshop. Well, thank you so much for your invitation, and if you need us, again, we teach multicultural studies, we have Judaic studies, we teach Africana studies, we teach, Middle Eastern studies, Asian American studies, and we're just on the 3rd floor here in this building, and come and see us. If we can help you in any way, please count on us. Thank you so much.
What was your name? I got your little...
I'm in MD 364. MD 364, Rodolfo Jacobo.
Well, wait, one second though. I want to make you an honorary member of our department.
All right.
Of the GC department.
All right.
So I have a little swag here,
thank you.
and you can pick out the size you want. But it is.
I've been growing lately.
Yeah. So pick out the size.
What is that?
It says graphic communications.
Thank you.
So that now, because this is the first semester, we're combining graphic communications 115 with MCS, Multicultural Studies 115, and I just hope we get to do more of it.
We will, definitely will. Thank you so much.
So you can pick out the one you want.
Which one's bigger? Because I've been eating a lot of times. If I can have my stereotypes.
There's a large and extra.
All right, I'll take the...
But so why don't we...
Thank you, people. Thank you very much. And did I have any my books anywhere else? The other books?